Scully, speaking about promoting a healthy school culture. Dr. Scully, as we know, has an extensive professional background dealing with children and their development, and as that relates in the educational setting. She's an ideal candidate to speak to us about this topic, not only because of her background, but because she's now very familiar with our own Langley environment, and she can apply what she knows professionally to what our experiences are here at school. So, no stranger to us. Turn it over to Dr. Scully.
Where it all began for me at the PALS opening kickoff parent education series. Full disclosure, I had some hand surgery this week, so I may be acting weird. Not because I'm on heavy medication, but because my hand is going to be elevated. So if you're noticing that, that's part of what's going on. I like to make my audience familiar with the speaker. This is a really neat opportunity for me for a couple of reasons. One, Beth is exactly right. A big portion of my professional life has been spent on the topic of building safe and healthy school climates for students. When I was a classroom teacher in the, well, I won't say the decade, but in the early part of my career, one of the things that was coming to the fore was there was a lot of work being done on harassment education. And so I became very involved with working with students on that issue. I did a lot of consulting in area independent schools on that topic. When I did my doctoral work and my dissertation research with boys, one of the things that emerged in looking at how masculinity is constructed in the adolescent peer culture has a lot to do with how boys treat one another and how they, for lack of a better word, police gender norms and boundaries. So this is a subject that I have been thinking about really since the inception of my educational career. And as I have become an administrator, pulling up out of the classroom space and the peer culture space into sort of the school climate lens, a lot of what I do in working with our division heads and with the administrative team is talk and think about how we create the conditions that are most ideal for learning. And everyone knows that when you have a safe and healthy learning environment for students, it makes it possible for us to do the things that we want to do educationally. And we know that threats in the school culture environment impede student learning and impede student progress. One of the things that is neat about this topic is that this is a topic that really is one of those vital school-home partnership topics. It's not something that the school can deal with in isolation, and it's not something that parents can deal with in isolation. So as a PALS topic, this knits together beautifully, because it requires a lot of communication, trust, and partnership between parents and school. So what I would like to do today is tell you a little bit about what we're going to talk about and think about. I think it's going to, what I hope to accomplish by the time we leave is to give you some information and an overview of what I think the research suggests are the important trends related to the topic of safe and healthy school environments. Look a little bit at the social development by division, primary, lower, and middle, that impact social climate and peer culture. To talk about those key threats to healthy school climate, what gets in the way. Define some terms related to those threats so that we're all working with the same set of operating assumptions about these topics. And look at the gray areas. There is a lot of gray in this field, and so part of what healthy schools do in partnership with parents is to wrestle with the tensions and those things that are not entirely clear. Talk a little bit about moral development. Describe Langley's approach to working on these issues, and to examine ways parents can support their children in the school in working on these things. That's a lot. I'm confident, however, that we can cover that terrain and still have plenty of time for you to ask questions and for us to have some discussion. So I think you have to start thinking about what do we want? And I do this, every time I do this workshop or a version of this workshop in an independent school, I start by saying we need to define where we're headed and what we want. And when we say we want a healthy school climate, we want some of the things that are on this slide. We want children to be encouraged to express authentic sense of self and to really explore who they are and feel comfortable being themselves at school. We want an environment where different kinds of kids are encouraged to be themselves and are embraced and celebrated. So if you're really good at something, you want that to be celebrated. If you are really working to learn something, we want that to be celebrated. If you are a kid that is, super outgoing and class cut up, that's great. If you're shy and we need to draw you out, that needs to be celebrated as well. So really paying careful attention to inclusion and diversity makes an environment safe. And one of the things that we know about teasing and some of the things that happens in schools that are unkind is areas of difference become places where kids poke and differentiate. And so that's why diversity really is one of those tenets of safety, because if kids are taught to embrace and celebrate diversity, then they tend not to go for those differences as being things to focus on. It's safe to take risks. This is what we want. We want kids to step out intellectually and in all areas of their life and take risks and know that it's safe to do that without fear of failing, without fear of being teased or made fun of for doing that. Community norms and values, rules and expectations are clear, not murky. So the kids know what our expectations are, and they know what happens when someone falls short of those expectations. Boundaries are respected, and this is hugely important. And when I say boundaries, I don't mean just physical boundaries, meaning you're not going to get pushed or shoved around in the school space, but also your emotional and psychological boundaries are honored and respected. When I do this workshop in other schools, and I'm not doing it with you today, I make the entire room stand up and do a boundaries exercise with me, where you put one group in a stationary position, you have another group opposite, and you ask one group to get as close as they possibly can to the other group. It really makes me an extremely popular presenter. And people always are having coffee, so there's like breath issues. But it is the best exercise I know to explain what a boundary is, because immediately in our gut, we have a physiological reaction to having a physical boundary transgressed. That sensation is what we have to remember applies in the psychological and emotional realm as well. All the little people that come to this school every day, and even the big people, have these boundaries, and they're different. And helping them to articulate what their boundaries and limits are and what they're comfortable with, and when their boundaries feel like they're being transgressed, is what school safety is all about. Caring adults are present and accessible. All the research says that schools are safe when children can say, I know the adults that I can go to if I'm having a hard time. I know who my safe person is. I had a conversation with a girl this summer. It was one of my favorite new Langley moments, and she was talking about having some friendship issues and not feeling like she had a firm social group. And I said, well, if something happened and you were feeling uncomfortable, who are your go-to adults? And she said, well, I would come and talk to you. And I thought, all right then. And it was an eye-opener, because I thought she was going to say, I would go talk to my advisor or my coach. And she said, I would come right here. And I thought, well, good for you. And it made me realize that every single one of us, no matter where we are, may be that safe person for a student. And that could be Dwayne Green, it could be Margaret Malecki, it could be, Nurse Kate. As long as a child knows, hey, I've got somebody who cares about me, who I can go to if I need to have a conversation, then we go a long way to creating safety. Respectful communication is modeled and practiced. That makes school environments safe for everyone. If we know how to have conversations that are sometimes hard and icky, but we trust that we can do that and get through it, that makes it safe. Problem solving, conflict resolution skills, those kinds of things are taught actively, because we know that school, as in life, is not just like a flat pond that we sail across in a canoe with no turbulence. There's always going to be stuff, but knowing what to do when the waters get rough and bumpy makes school environments safe. And then finally, self-advocacy and resilience are promoted. This is the new hot buzzword in education. You're going to have Heather Tedesco come and put you in groups to work on this and talk about it. It's really awesome. But I will say at the outset, I think this is one of the hardest things to actually operationalize. How do you teach resilience? What does a curriculum on resilience really look like? We know that kids that are most successful later in life and in their educational context are resilient, but how do you help kids do that? In a culture where sometimes it feels like the stakes are high, where if you make a mistake, it's catastrophic. So I think schools and educators are really wrestling with this resilience idea in very powerful and important ways, but I think it's something we need to be talking about at Langley. So that's what we're after. That's our goal, and we could probably add 100 more things to that list, but that's where we're headed. So let's talk a little bit about, in addition to wanting to promote that healthy, safe space for kids, what's going on with them socially and developmentally? Because when they come to us as 3- and 4-year-olds, and by the time they leave us as 8th graders, a lot of development has happened around their social skills and their ability to be effective members of a community. So let's talk about what goes on in primary school. And this is a very simplified list because I am kind of going at the 30,000-foot level. We could spend 4 hours just on social skill development in primary school. Leslie could take the reins and do that with you for quite a while. But one of the things that we know is that when students are in primary school, they're starting to move gradually from what we call parallel play to more shared play and collaboration. And you can see parallel play when you go to a playground with young children and they're playing with trucks and they're just doing their thing. And it's almost, they're aware of the person next to them, they're sensing that there's another person. Maybe that Tonka truck is slightly more glamorous and cool than mine, but I'm not actually creating yet a sand pit for cement making. I'm actually just doing my thing with my truck. And when they get into primary school, we are putting them deliberately in developmentally appropriate context where we're asking them to do things with each other. Share things, right? Do something as a team. And that is important, but it's also going to mean there are going to be some bumps. Someone's going to take my truck, and I'm going to burst into tears. I might shove them as a result of that. I am not a sociopath. I am in primary school, and I'm learning how to share. Right? You may think you have children who are sociopaths in your house. They are not. They are developing along a normal pathway. Impulse control. That's a big one, right? So when you're little and you decide you want to do something, and I was in the preschool, that first week of school, and I remember looking at Stephanie Miller, and she's like, yeah, impulse control, we're working on it. A child had his snack and put an entire banana in his mouth at one time, and then sort of vomited out his left hand. I thought, you know, wow, this is different. And Stephanie was great. I was like, this is disgusting. I need to leave immediately. And Stephanie said, I know you're excited about eating your banana, but we're going to do it in small bites. That's why she's here, and I am not. So, you know, we know that at this age, idea happens here. I'm just going to go do it. Maybe I should slide, I'm going to jump on someone's back on the playground and go down the slide with them. That seems like a great idea. Not to the person who's now sandwiched face down in the gravel. So, we're working with young children at this age to help them control their impulses. And the reality is, some kids get that really easily. I was a very controlled and non-impulsive child. Malcolm Scully was not. I have scars all over my body to prove it. And so it doesn't happen at the same rate for everybody. But in terms of social development, we're asking kids to contain some of that energy in productive ways to be in school. I will also say, and I put this up deliberately, this is where the first policing of gender boundaries starts. A boy goes over and picks up something that is considered a girl toy, and someone says, you can't play with that. And we work really hard here at Langley to ensure that we're not doing that, because we know that limits and constrains kids in ways that we don't think is good. When we move into lower school, though, and when I say lower school, think about us. We're starting with first graders, and they're all the way going through 5th grade, so that's a huge amount of development. But this is where that peer sphere really starts to influence them. You ask a lower schooler who their friends are, and they'll say Mrs. Harnish and Mrs. Miller and Mrs. Malcolm. And that's great that they feel like those people are their friends. When they move into lower school and go through lower school, friends become their peers. And figuring out where they fit within that peer group and who are their friends at that time become really important. Real cooperative learning in teams take root. They're doing this a lot more, so there's a lot more negotiation. So this is when a child will come home and say, someone was mean to me today. And that could mean any number of things. It could mean that something mean happened, or it could mean that I was put on this team and then I was moved to this other team and they said, what are you doing on this team? And you don't know. So there's a huge degree of variation. The importance of friends rivals the importance of parents and teachers in their social development. This is where they start to put their locus of social interaction outside of their family and their teacher and on what's going around them. And we want that to happen. That's important. That's socially normal. But that also means that they are going to experience turbulence in this area in varying degrees of with varying degrees of comfort. When they are in 1st, 2nd grade, friendships can change really quickly, right? And you can have 4 friends on Monday and have no friends on Friday. That's the perception, right? Monday, flush with friends, Friday, an island. And so they may come home and say, I don't have any friends anymore. And you think, oh my God, they have no friends anymore. But really, remember, that friendship is not a deep friendship yet, and it's very changeable. It doesn't mean that their feelings about that aren't important, but our reaction to that is extremely important. Because if we make that a catastrophic, what do you mean? What did you do? Did you alienate your friends? Not helpful, right? If you have 4 friends on Monday and none on Friday, I bet you'll have 2 by next Monday. It's just meeting them in a world where you have to remember how permanent this stuff is. 8-year-olds, when you're moving up 3rd and 4th grade, that's where you start to see friendship groups, right? So in first grade, friends are, it's a carousel of friends, some up, some down. Third grade, we have groups. I'm being invited over to someone's house. So-and-so is in my friend group. They are my best friend. They are starting to attach meaning to that. Again, that can still change, but it feels more permanent, and it's based more on things that they do together and things that they're interested in. This is where you start to see nascent definitions of popularity and social power. Hard to believe, right? That seems awfully young, but it does start then. There are kids that command a kind of energy in a room, and that gives them social power and draws kids to them. Some kids aren't as good at that, and so you're already getting sort of hierarchies of how people respond to one another, and that can get thorny. 9-year-olds, now we're talking about much more sophisticated little beings, a lot's happening. They can negotiate things as friends, and this is where they can start to be anxious. If something hard happens at school one day, I might be nervous about going back the next day. And so that sort of anxiety and carrying things forward becomes important. They're also reasoning a lot more toward the end of lower school. They are noticing differences, and so they're attending to differences more. They understand cause and effect in a much more sophisticated way. They become more competitive. I'm going to be first at this. I want to be good at something. They're having, that competition actually starts to set in. And they're very interested in concepts of fairness. That's not fair. It's not right. If you ask a bunch of older elementary school teachers, what they spend a lot of time negotiating is fairness, that sense of justified righteousness, that child got ahead of me in line, and that's not right. Or they got to do something and I didn't. That's not fair. That's great. We want them to be doing that, but you can imagine what kinds of social issues that kicks up on a regular basis. Middle school, those beautiful years that are the last here. So much is happening in middle school. And again, at different rates for different children, right? It's not all uniform. So the sort of who am I, where do I fit? Interest-based friendships are entrenched at this point. We're on the same soccer team. We are buds. We are soccer buds. You've got that. That's our thing. They are totally aware of social power. They know how to destabilize a social group. They know what a well-placed comment can do. They know what ripples through a group when you say things. They know what it's like to be funny and get laughs and get attention. Puberty adds a wonderful dynamic. We all know that. Emotions are running high and low. Some days I feel really happy, and some days I'm weepy. It's just all part of it, right? But that is happening in our middle school for huge groups of kids simultaneously, right? So that's the joy. You have maybe a pubertal child with 1 or 2 sample size at home. We have 40 or more. So remembering that creates a dynamic in middle school. Girls in particular, Beth is sad, and so now I am also very sad. Beth is my friend. And so Beth is sad, and then Leslie's sad, and then we have a pack of sad because I am mirroring your emotions. I'm connecting with you. I'm taking on your pain and suffering is my pain and suffering. And that's great sometimes. And you can imagine, I'm being a little funny, what the dark side of that is. So Beth and I are now mad at Leslie. Something happened with Leslie and Beth on the school bus on the way to school, and now Elinor is also mad at Leslie. Elinor has no idea what happened on the school bus. She walked to school. And she has no friends. She walked to school. And lonely uphill both ways. And she sees Beth, and Beth says there was a travesty, a socially unjust thing happened on the bus to me, and I hate Leslie. Now I hate Leslie. And now I'm going to go see if I can get Kathleen to hate Leslie. Now that is what we're working on, right? But that's part of what they're learning about and experimenting with. They're sharing each other's pain and suffering as a way to figure out. And they're literally trying things on. Middle school is like a wardrobe change every day. Not in a literal sense, but like I'm going to see what it's like to be cool today. I'm going to see what it's like to throw a comment into a group today and see what happens. So I won't belabor this. Popularity is huge. Norms of what's cool and socially acceptable are important. There's a lot of insecurity and self-consciousness. A good defense is sometimes a big offense. I'm going to put a big brash personality out there because really down deep inside I'm not feeling so sure about who I am. And then finally there's a huge desire for independence. So it's this with mom and dad. You know, some days I'm going to curl up in your lap and tell you about everything, and other days I'm going to slam the door in your face and tell you to keep out. It's my space. And they have to do that, because eventually you want them to have their own space, like a house and a life outside of yours. So practicing doing that in middle school is how they test it out. Okay. What we know socially is that some experimentation with negative social interactions is part of growing up. If there's a person in this room that has never said something mean in their childhood or done something slightly nefarious as part of a social group, I want to meet you after this meeting and have a chat with you. All of us can remember, if we're honest, moments in our growing up where we tried on something that was less than kind or unfriendly. That is part of it. One of the trends that researchers are writing about that is worrisome is the amount of unstructured time for play in childhood is diminishing. And as that diminishes, so too are moments where children are on their own, figuring things out. Their time is increasingly adult-directed. They're in a piano lesson, then they're going to soccer, then they're going to travel soccer, then they're going to elite travel soccer, then they're going to Young Olympics travel soccer, then they're going to the Olympics, and then they come home and they do some math, judo, and go to sleep. And they haven't gone out in the backyard and built a fort with sticks and old bedclothes on their own, where someone has to decide, I'm in charge of the structure of the wood teepee, someone's in charge of putting the sheets in, and I'll make the meal. That's sad, because when we did that growing up, we negotiated a lot of stuff. I want to be the person putting the tent poles up. No, I want to be the one in charge of bed sheeting. I'm the cook. No adult came out and said, let's sit down and hold hands and have a conversation and negotiate who's going to have the roles in the teepee. It just got sorted. And I worry that to some degree that the structure in kids' lives are making it much harder for them to work some of this stuff out, because they're in highly adult-driven moments. And so I think one of the things that's happening, and I see this as a trend as an educator, is more of the anxiety that kids experience around social conflict, and more of the anxiety that parents experience around social conflict is coming to school, because when they're out of school, they're like, ready, set, go. At 4 o'clock, we're going to run through 6 activities, then we're going to have dinner, maybe get a bath, maybe not, and then start all over again. So I think we have to pay attention to that. Okay, so common threats to healthy school culture. I have picked 5 for the purposes of this conversation. There are others I'm sure we could pick. Luckily, we are in an environment where there are not many threats, but these are the ones we're going to focus on, because these are the ones that I see with greater frequency. And quite honestly, as a new head of school, over the course of the last year, these are the 5 that came up the most. Okay, so let's talk about them for a second. Unkind, mean behaviors. How do we define unkind, mean behaviors? Well, these are hurtful behaviors that happen as part of growing up, as early as in primary school and as late as when you're 46 years old and you go to a dinner party. They are things that can happen where someone is less than kind. It could be in the school space, name-calling, a rude comment, making fun of someone, leaving someone out, laughing, joking that goes too far. Here's the piece with unkind behaviors. They can be intentional and they can be unintentional, right? So sometimes we're unkind by accident. Sometimes we are unkind on purpose. For kids, it's a way to test boundaries sometimes. Let me see if I do this, what will happen. How far can I push my parent? How far can I push my friend? Let me test some boundaries out. It can be pressured and peer motivated. The culture is at our lunch table, we say something snarky, because that's what we do at our lunch table. That's what the culture is. It can be a show-off moment. So I want to be in this group with this group of kids, and I know if I come in and I offer a zinger or I say something snarky or sarcastic, they're going to think that's cool and I'm in. There's a lot of this around gender, I noticed in my research, particularly with boys. So if I can kind of make fun of somebody, that's cool, and I'm in the group. Girls do it too, in a different way. This unkind behavior can also be actually not motivated unkind behavior, but actually problems with impulse control and self-regulation. So you can have a 2nd grader who goes into the bathroom, which is like King's Dominion if there's no teacher. There are toilets, doors, and a sink and paper towel. And hand soap. So like that's full-on King's Dominion if there's not enough. And so I decided it would be awesome to turn all the faucets on, put some soap on the floor, crawl around, look up some stalls, and maybe scream at the top of my voice. Because I may be ADD. Maybe not. I may just be wild and crazy fun. But the bottom line is, I'm not trying to destabilize the bathroom into an unsafe place to urinate. I am actually just kicking up some antics. And so the reality is, sometimes we attribute, as adults, motives to things that are just not motivated that way. Now, are there kids that go into the bathroom and intentionally try to do bad things? Sure. But we have to remember that some of the things that adults we see as problematic are not motivated that way, and they may land in a way that makes someone feel uncomfortable, but they're not intended to be that way. And I see that a lot with kids that have impulse issues, where we're learning about their learning, and they say things, they blurt something out. A better example than King's Dominion in the restroom is, I blurt something out that isn't very nice. Not because I'm a mean person, but because I think it, and I have like this pea-shaped prefrontal cortex that's even smaller than that, and I just say it. Because I haven't figured out how to regulate myself. There are grown-ups like that. My favorite is the one who always says to me, oh, Elinor, you look tired. How are you? I can tell, it's all in your face. Thanks. Thank you for caring for me. So, are they trying to be mean? No, not necessarily. So I say that because this is part of life, and we need to recognize this. But we also have to pay attention, because what can happen is sometimes these behaviors turn into something that we're now learning about called gateway behaviors. So Kathleen Smith helped me, introduced me to a researcher named Dr. Englander, who has spent her entire career as a professor doing research on bullying behaviors in schools. And she's actually coming to us on Friday to do a full-day training with our teachers. She's a remarkable educator, very research-based and incredibly knowledgeable. And she has coined the term gateway behaviors. What Dr. Englander says is you've got this bucket of unkind behaviors and things that are not so nice, that are part of life. And we have to arm kids with the ability to manage those and deal with them. We cannot insulate them from those. That would be detrimental to their development. But what we have to pay attention to as parents and as educators are what she calls gateway behaviors. And these are psychologically contemptuous, rude behaviors that are sort of low-level, low-grade ways to express power and to express contempt. And they're subtle. So that's whispering about someone right in front of them. Right? That's snickering if someone walks by. That is rolling your eyes when someone offers an opinion in class and you look over at your friend and you're like, okay? So, is that a 5-alarm fire? Do we need to handcuff them? No. But we really need to pay attention, because that is a hurtful, cruel behavior. And what we know about gateway behaviors is that they accumulate. And when they start to accumulate and become a pattern, we're moving away from run-of-the-mill unkindness into something that is more serious. We know that in modern times, so if you grew up at in an earlier time, bullying was associated with physical intimidation and physical hostility. That's like the sort of stereotype of I'm going to shove you into the locker, you know. Bullying today is not so much physical. It's much more psychological. And gateway behaviors are that area right before you get into serious bullying or harassment that is the thing we have to pay attention to. Are they always bullying? No. Do we sometimes roll our eyes out of frustration? Sure. But when we do it intentionally over and over and over again, then we're in a different classification. Then things are getting more serious. What we know is that if they're left unchecked and they accumulate in frequency and in quality, then they escalate into bullying. One-off, not so much. And the reality is, kids are going to whisper. They're excited. Someone comes into the dance and I'm going to lean over and whisper. That may not be particularly nice, but that's not, again, a 5-alarm fire. But when gateway behaviors accumulate, they absolutely become problematic. So this is something we need to pay attention to. Dr. Englander says, has a beautiful analogy for this, which is she calls this psychological littering. So let me give you an example. You're walking into Langley School, late to drop off your child's cello. And you notice a student taking a water bottle, finishing it, and throwing it on the ground. Most of us would say, hey, wait a second, we're green here at Langley. Let's pick up that water bottle and put it in the recycling bin. We don't litter here. If you walk into Langley School dropping off the cello and you hear someone say something really mean and snarky about another person and laugh, that is psychological littering. But do we stop and say, actually at Langley we don't say things like that. That's not very nice. So I'm going to ask you not to do that. In the same way that I'm going to ask you not to throw your garbage on the ground, I'm going to ask you not to throw around comments and remarks that are psychologically garbage-like, and we got to clean it up. And I think we're really able to do the littering when it's concrete garbage. We are less able to do it when it is this other content. We think, well, I don't know this kid, or I don't know what the situation is, or did I really hear that right, or I'm so shocked that it happened, by the time I get my wits about me, they're off too. So what Englander suggests, and this is what we're going to work on with her on Friday at great length, is how do adults in a community take shared responsibility for cleaning up the psychological littering? And how do we do that in a way that empowers kids? So let's get, poor Beth, she's PALS president. Everybody, if you want to be the PALS president, this is what happens to you. So let's assume that I observe Beth psychologically littering the campus. And it's about Leslie again. And I come over as the head of school and I decide to address it. What I'm not going to do is say, Beth, I just heard that you were whispering about Leslie. How do you think that makes Leslie feel? Because then poor Leslie will say, it's fine, no, Dr. Scully, Beth and I are cool, it's okay, because she doesn't want the attention on her. So what I'm going to say to Beth is, Beth, that made me really uncomfortable. Dr. Scully didn't like how that felt. We don't say stuff like that at school. I need you to make sure that you're kind of leaving that at the door and really getting your act together. That way, I've marked for Beth some littering, but I'm not putting the onus on Leslie. So, gateway behaviors, really important. What I will suggest is that gateway behaviors, as much as they happen in the lunchroom at the Langley School, they happen in the minivan on the way back from baseball practice. They happen at the slumber party when you bring another bowl of popcorn down. So our responsibility, our A-U-R responsibility, is that we will work on the litter that happens here, and you have to work on the litter that happens at your house. And this is hard, because it means you may have to address a child that is not your own. So I offer that for your consideration. Okay, now, let's talk a little bit about sexual harassment. This is what I did my research on. And I put sexual in parentheses because sexual harassment really is an older middle school and into high school concept. We don't have a lot of sexual harassment, fortunately, in the elementary school. But what we know about, and we do around gender stuff, though, the sort of boys can't do that, girls can't do that, that's so gay, why, that's sexual harassment for sure. Sexual harassment has a really easy definition. It's unwanted attention with this important clause, in most cases that persists or is recurrent, that interferes with an individual's ability to feel safe and comfortable at school. What do we know about harassment? It is an eye of the beholder concept. Hard for kids to understand, hard for some grown-ups to understand. Leslie and I are in the faculty room and we're having a great old talk, yucking it up, joking around. Kathleen walks in and hears our interaction. Leslie and I are fine. I'm teasing her, she's teasing me back, it's all good. But to Kathleen, that's like, ooh, that feels hostile and yucky. If the comments turn to Kathleen, Kathleen gets to say that's not okay with me. She gets to determine if something feels okay. Older adolescents really struggle with this. It's my right of free speech to express my thoughts. Well, you have to own the impact of your actions as well as the intent. So you can intend to be funny, you can intend to be clever, you can intend to flirt with someone, but when it lands on them in a way that feels uncomfortable and yucky, you have to change your behavior. You don't get to keep doing it. This was the big issue in workplace harassment cases in the early 80s, right? When men or women would make jokes about sex or something in the workplace, and people would say, get over it, I'm just joking around, it's funny. Well, if the person who's hearing that joke or comment says it isn't funny, then it's not appropriate. And that's at the nexus. Harassment is a continuum. There are really egregious cases of harassment. And there are things that are jokes that are slightly on the line. So what we know about harassment is it falls out along a continuum. So shoving someone on the bus, physically giving them, shoving them is much more serious than, making a joke or teasing someone and not being sure if it lands well. All of it is worth addressing and needs to be understood, but it's a continuum. And this is hard for kids, and it's hard sometimes for educational institutions. Harassment is not power dependent. Anybody can, you don't have to have a power differential in order for harassment to occur. You can have two peers that have the same social status and are equally empowered in the school. They can run afoul of this. What we know is that generally a one-time occurrence goes back to a mean or unkind or off-color kind of placeholder. But when it happens over and over and over again, and you have a pattern, then you have harassment. Some low-level harassment is stuff that we can empower kids to deal with. We can give them words and terms and conflict resolution. That wasn't funny, that wasn't respectful, please don't speak to me that way. At the more intense end of the continuum, kids need adult help and intervention to figure out what to do. Bullying. What makes bullying different? Well, bullying is the hot issue right now. If you want to do research on an educational topic, this is the one to look at. Dr. Englander alleges, and I agree with her, that the term bullying is chronically overused, and as a result, that creates huge problems for dealing with the cases that are in fact true bullying cases. Bullying at its root is an abusive behavior, and it needs to be understood in that context as an abusive behavior. It's not always easy to recognize. None of these behaviors really are. It is not separate from what happens in the school environment or on the internet. What we're seeing for young children is that they don't make distinctions between what happens in cyberspace and what happens in their physical school space or in their homes. To them, it's a giant continuum. It's where they live. They live in cyberspace and in inhabitable real-time space. Bullying is not a problem that adults alone can fix. Absolutely, they have to be involved, but we have to help kids figure out what to do about bullying equally as much as we figure out what the adult role is. Again, as I said, most bullying that occurs today is probably less physical and more psychological in nature, and it goes underground more quickly. And we're going to talk about cyberbullying because I think that adds a layer of complexity that didn't exist, 20 years ago. Okay, so there's so many definitions of bullying, but here's one to give you a sense. It's unwanted aggressive behavior that involves a power imbalance. The behavior is repeated or has the potential to be repeated, and it can include lots of things. Threats, spreading rumors, abusive or derogatory language, attacking someone physically or verbally, excluding them from a group on purpose. Here's the real meat of the matter. In order for it to be bullying, these three things have to be present. And this is just, again, remember we have this bucket of harassment, so there are other behaviors that are also toxic in a school culture and problematic, but for it to be bullying, there has to be a power imbalance, it has to be repeated, and it has to be intentional. Now, a couple of those things are really hard to suss out. How do you know intention? It's hard to know always what intention is. If I see something once, how do I know that it's a one-time occurrence or has it happened 16 other times in places where I haven't been? But in the eyes of the law and in the eyes of how we sort of think about dealing with these are things that need to be present, and they are what distinguish bullying behaviors from other kinds of acts of unkindness and or things to be concerned about. So, what does cyberbullying add to the equation? Let's make it yet more complicated. So, cyberbullying is tricky because technology has really exacerbated a lot of what we know about kids' development around social skills. They are constantly communicating digitally, and that's actually juxtaposed with the sophistication of their social skills. So it's a hard thing, right? It's hard for adults who have sophisticated social skills sometimes to communicate clearly in email. More and more I find myself as a school leader with power as a head of school using the telephone or a face-to-face interaction over an email because for all the reasons you know. Now imagine putting that device in the hands of someone who is 9 and how sophisticated their social skills are, and now they're going to be communicating using an electronic medium. Again, for kids, I think I still have a more of a bright line, although it's eroding with every passing year of my life, where I'll say to myself, I'm not going to open my email again tonight. I'm going to pour myself a glass of white wine, and I'm going to sit on the porch, and I'm not going to look at my email again until 6. And I am able to do that most of the time in a way that a teenager today doesn't. Unless you take the phone from them out of their hot, sweaty little palm before they lay their head down on the pillow, they are going to be looking at that medium as much as they can. So it's blurry for them. The world of the internet is the world that they inhabit. And we know that it starts younger and younger, their interaction with technology. Now, the other piece. Bullying and cyberbullying are neither separate nor equal. And what I mean by that is, again, kids don't see cyberspace and hallways as different. For them, text messaging is just another way of hanging out. So imagine, when I hang out with people, I go to their house, or I meet them at a restaurant. For kids, they go hang out on the internet in a way that no matter how much I use technology, I probably am not going to do. The other thing is, we don't yet understand how their use of technology is actually affecting their emotional and cognitive development. That's the new, I think, if I were a researcher in grad school today, that would be something I would really want to hitch my wagon to. Because we know that it changes how they interact, but what we don't know is how does that influence how they're actually growing up. So, digital communications differ from non-digital communication in these ways, and this is what gets complicated, right? So easy to use. You have a false sense of privacy, anonymity, your disinhibition, out the window. I can just say this quickly in a little Instagram message, done. There are no nonverbal cues, and it has really increased the incidence of casual cruelty. I'm just going to ping this little message off, and I don't have to see how it lands on my target bully. Elinor has bullied Beth all morning. I don't have to see how it lands because I'm not with that person. And as Englander says, you can't get away. So let's assume you walk into a lunchroom and you just get the vibe that there's a Sharky table. Well, you can say, I'm going to take my peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Actually, not peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Still a high school model for me. I'm going to take my gluten-free bread and I'm going to go sit under a tree because I can get away. I can make a move and I can change the dynamic. At least I can do that. But if someone is pinging me on my cell phone, I can throw it in the Potomac River, but that's not really a long-term solution. Okay, so cyberbullying is huge. What we know then is a couple of things. This is not a technology issue per se. So I say that looking at Brad Lands, who's one of the best role models I can think of for teaching kids about ethical use. This is not a technology issue. This is a how we raise kids issue. It's a how we treat kids to treat each other issue, and how do we train them to use electronic means of communication respectfully. So I don't want anyone to say, if we just got rid of all that technology, that's not an answer. And kids will report that when their parents bemoan the use of technology in that sort of Luddite way, like your generation, it doesn't help them. We have to accept that this is how they communicate, it's how we communicate, and we need to actively instruct them how to do that respectfully. So, cyberbullying is characterized by the subjective perception of being cruelly targeted through electronic means. Because the target's experience may definitely feel abusive, the initiating or originating incident does not have to meet the exact same criteria of bullying. It doesn't always have to have the intention, and that is what distinguishes it slightly. Digital environments are so changeable and fluid, so intention is a lot harder to determine in this environment. When you're seeing bullying in a school setting, even though intention is somewhat harder to read, you have more chance of reading it when you're live with the person. It's harder to take a 4 or 5 word text and unpack it for intention. So we have to recognize that the online space requires us to be a little more flexible in our thinking. Let me talk briefly about gray areas. So this is really hard stuff. You're nodding, I see the recognition in your faces when I describe some of these behaviors. You've clearly seen them and are familiar with them. But here's what's super, super challenging. And it's, how do you decide when to react and when not to react? So if some of these ideas are on a continuum, and if some of them have implied interpretation, how do we know when to jump in and when not to? In a world where children are increasingly having the intercession and involvement of adults in so many ways in their life, how do we figure out and calibrate the right amount of response? We know that if we insulate children from any unkindness, we're doing them a huge disservice, right? If they go through life and they don't ever experience a bump in the road, they're in trouble. And yet, we can't have unchecked gateway behaviors and bullying behaviors happening in our homes and in the school. We also need to help our children talk with us in a way so that we can unpack intention more honestly, because that really is important. I have a very different feeling when I'm interacting with children where I know there's been a cruel intentional act versus someone that did something in an impulsive and sort of lighthearted way and got off track. It's a different, the response is different. You don't want to use a sledgehammer every single time you see something. You also need to develop ways to help kids understand the sort of the nuances of all of that. Vulnerability and resilience vary. You can have two children who experience the exact same set of circumstances, and one is like a seal that just rolls right off their back. They're like, huh, what happened? I didn't even notice. And another who feels like they have a spear in their heart, right? And, it's because the kids are different, and their senses of vulnerability and resilience are different. And so balancing when you tell the kid who's resilient and is like a seal to advocate for themselves versus when you step in, that's really hard. So at the end of the day, no matter how gray and murky this is, we have to expect and ask children to behave civilly and respectfully. We have to set a high bar. And then we have to wade into these gray areas and try to figure out what the right proportionate response is. Dr. Englander said something that really struck me, is she said, we spend a lot of time, telling children how to feel, that they should feel certain ways. And in some cases, you can't demand that a child have a feeling reaction. You can't say, why are you always mean to Beth, Elinor? You need to be nicer to her. You can't require me to love Beth, even though I do. But you can require me to treat Beth respectfully. And I think that's hard. You can't ask kids to be friends with people that they are not going to naturally be friends with. But we can require that they behave civilly. So my favorite researcher du jour is a guy named Rick Weissbourd, and you've heard me, if you've been at other Palace talks, you've heard me speak of him. Kathleen and I are going to see him next week when we go to Harvard for a workshop. I met him there. He came to my previous school. He and I partnered on some interesting research on girls and girls' sexuality. He's the bomb. And our faculty read his book, The Parents We Mean to Be. Even though it's a book about parenting, it's a book about moral development. So I put this up because this can feel really overwhelming, all of this information about how do we do this. But we have to remember that at the core of all of these issues is the moral development of children, which is the most important thing that parents and schools can do for children. I don't care what you say to me about anything else. We can give them the most amazing instruction in every subject area, and we can teach them to play ballet, or play soccer and do ballet, and be incredibly intellectually capable. But if they are morally unable to interact respectfully with other people, none of that matters. So, Weissbourd says the primary sole task of parenthood is to raise moral beings. And I would add, the school is your second number 2 willing partner. And he also argues that we as a society have become so preoccupied with achievement and happiness that we have stopped working on morality at the peril of generations of kids. So we're so worried that they're going to get into Harvard, that they're going to leave Langley and have really high SSAT scores and go to that perfect high school, and that will get them to an Ivy League school, and then all will be well. And we also want them to be incredibly happy and joyful along the way, no bumps and everything's awesome. That we spend so much time thinking about that we're not doing the moral work. And I think that's why they're scheduled within an inch of their lives, and doing piano and several layers of soccer and then some taekwondo and some meditation. so that they have all that package to present to a college. And what I would say is that that misses something vitally important. Rick says that there are 4 things that we have to teach kids. And those 4 things are moral literacy. We have to help them develop a moral identity that includes moral motivation, and I'll say more about that in a minute. We have to teach them how to manage destructive emotions, and we have to teach them how to reason. Moral literacy, knowing right from wrong. This actually isn't that hard. Rick would argue, and I completely agree with him, that kids don't struggle with this. They know right from wrong in almost all of the cases. The problem is not whether knowing the right thing to do, it's being motivated to do the right thing. To override other impulses in service of the moral good. So I'm in the lunchroom and all the cool kids are doing something and I want to be cool, but what they're doing is not very nice. I am possessed of an inner sense of moral identity and motivation to resist joining in that group behavior that is mean-spirited because I know it's wrong. Even though if I did it, my social capital would go up and I would be in that club. So he really argues that moral motivation, that at the heart of moral motivation is appreciation. That ability to know and value other people, to walk in someone else's shoes, otherwise known as empathy. Empathy is what motivates us morally to do the right thing. It is. I remember in high school there was this dorky guy that people made fun of, and I remember feeling in my heart this anxiety because I knew what it felt like for him when he was teased. I knew it. It was just in my gut, and I can remember to this day. I remember his name, I remember what he wore, I remember where our lockers were, because he was a target. And my sense of empathy and connection would be triggered every time that happened in a really acute way. That's moral motivation. I remember trying to stick up for him and get in between stuff because I had social capital that I could spend, and I didn't like what it felt like for that guy. The other piece is, Rick says we have to acknowledge that children have destructive emotions. You know, if I had a dime for every time a parent said to me, my child has never had a mean thought, they are just a little small angel dropped from heaven. And I think, wow, that is so awesome, and aren't you lucky? And I'm thinking, because everyone has bad thoughts, right? So this idea that there are these perfect little angel children that don't ever do anything and don't ever think, I'm a little bit jealous, I'm a little bit envious, I'm a little bit mad, I'm a little grumpy. That happens. It's not pretending that those emotions aren't there, it's what do you do about them? And it's coming up with the ability to resist them and not act on them, right? Okay, and then finally he says we need to teach moral reasoning, the ability to reason through problems. And that's an older concept for children. So when do I stick up for my friend? If I'm a bystander and I see something going on, what is my responsibility to intercede? How do I do that effectively? How am I a good big sister or a good big brother? What are the limits of my keeping a secret? All of that moral reasoning. So what does Langley do? So here's our approach. Emerging. Do we have this nailed? No. We're working on it. I've learned so much in the last year about how we can do better on this work, but I've worked long and hard with our administrative team, and here is our approach. 1, teacher training. Dr. Englander is coming on Friday. I'm so excited. Kathleen and I asked her, and she said, I am so busy. You know, I just don't think that there's any way I could probably get to you until next year. And we said, what about October 10th? And there was this long pause, and she said, I think I could maybe come. Dancing around. So she's coming, and she's going to do an all-day training on this topic, particularly focusing on unkind behaviors, gateway behaviors, cleaning up gateway, psychological litter, creating safety in climates. We're going to do a lot of case study work. She has also developed a number of curricula that she has pilot tested and done research on, and so I think we will probably be working with her to assess her curricula and see if there's one we would like to adopt. Responsive Classroom, which is done in the primary school and lower school, does a lot of this, but we don't have a good older elementary and middle school curricula that we can use for those older grades, so we need to do that. So student support and education. SEL stands for social emotional learning. We are shopping right now for the right fit for us to do that work. The research increasingly is saying that the most powerful benefit in this work is to train kids to work with other kids. And that's not a surprise. It worked with alcohol and drug education. It worked with peer pressure. Of course it would work with this. And we have a fabulous potential model to do that here because we have buddy programs. And we have older kids. And we have a great new middle school where we could bring the younger kids over and they could be with older kids who we actually train and develop their leadership capacity around them. Parent partnership. Us, all of us in this room, and all the people that aren't here, we have to do this together. We have to do this in partnership. We have to do it at school. You have to do it in your basements. You have to do it in the car. It takes a village, and that is cliched as all get out, but the reality of that is true. We have articulated policies, the community contract, our safe school policy, our technology acceptable use policies. I don't think it's as much of a policy issue as it is boots on the ground, what do we do in the moment, and making sure that kids are giving voice to their experience. When we get that, we will be able to wade into that gray area and work together to say, when does the school need to do something? When do parents need to do something? Lessons that I've learned over the last year, we are certainly going to be more proactive than we have been in the past. We are calling parents more frequently just to say, hey, we're hearing something. We haven't seen it yet, but this is what we're seeing. What are you hearing? I'm imploring you if things are going on to assess them for yourself and then let us know. We have to teach, a lot of things here, so we can't turn ourselves into just a social and emotional learning incubator. We have to teach math and reading and Spanish and some other things, but we also want to do this, and we want to do this with you. What can parents do? Englander made this brilliant quote when I was reading a book, and it changed my way of thinking as a school administrator. So I have been in this business for 25 years. I have seen thousands of cases of unkind and difficult student interactions. My sample size of crud is so big, right? I've been a classroom teacher, I've been an advisor, I've seen hundreds of thousands of cases of kids not necessarily making good choices. Parent sample size is 1, 2, 3, or 4. Some people have more than 4 children, but my point is, for a parent, your sample size of 1 is all you know. And so it's really acute for you. Because when your child comes home and says, I don't have any friends, people hate me, I don't have anyone to eat with at lunch, that feels horrible. And when you come to the school, it feels horrible for us too, but we also have seen kids that have had that many, many, many times and successfully navigated their way out of it. So when we look at each other across this divide, I think it's important to remember how our perspectives are different based on our lived experiences. At the end of the day, I'm going to jump down a little bit. The thing that will get us through any interaction is a presumption of goodwill. We have to have a presumption of goodwill. We will presume goodwill that if your sample size of 1 is in pain, that is something we will sit with you and help you figure out. And you have to trust and presume goodwill that in our sample size of 500, we can contextualize this for you and hold your hand through it and give you a bigger lens. Discipline is not the only response that's going to fix this. The research is really clear on that. We have to do work on kids' social competence, their moral development, and probably working with student leaders. Partnership and communication is the bedrock. Role modeling is vital. I say this because if you pick up your cell phone with your best friend and say something really snarky about your next door neighbor, little ears and little eyes are watching. I don't ever get to take my hat off and not be the head of this school. Everywhere I go, including getting my hair blown out yesterday because I wanted to look nice for you and I have a hurt hand, I was surrounded by 3 Langley parents. So, high alert. High alert, I'm on high alert. I am never not the head of this school. You are never not the parent of your child. And every social interaction that you have, they will watch. Every social interaction that I have, they will watch. It does take a village. You are going to have to tell other people's children to knock it off and be nice. Increasingly, I think we think, well, all I can do is shape my little child. And then there's this monster that comes into our house and is the bad seed that's doing all these terrible things. No, don't label other people's children. And don't not engage them on a moral dimension. If someone is in your house doing something mean, say, in the Scully household, we don't speak that way. I need you, when you come over to our house, to remember, here are the rules of engagement. When you drive around in Elinor Scully's car, we don't say things like that. So, and you have to stand up to parent peer pressure. So, if you think one of your child's friends is constantly stirring the pot, pick up the phone and call that parent and say, can I talk to you parent to parent about something? In the car the other day, this was going on, and I need your help. Don't talk about that parent behind their back. Don't avoid the honest conversation. Pick up the phone and have it. And so I'll close before we take questions by simply saying, please, please, please talk to us, engage us, call us. We may not always agree. We don't always get it right, but we will work with you. And please, please, please don't underestimate what I call the value of EQ, emotional intelligence. In our rush to give children a happy and high-achieving life, we're neglecting their development as people of character and kindness. The skill that we can give your children, and you can give to them with us, is the ability to have empathy and appreciate others. That will carry them throughout their whole life successfully. If they have empathy, and if they can walk in the shoes of another person and imagine and appreciate what that person's life is like, they will be just fine. And the rest will take care of itself. So that's my pitch. Let's have some questions. How about that?
So I like the fact that you gave us the things that we should be doing, including some of the wording. On the last one, if you do pick up the phone and you wait and you talk to somebody face to face, and they are one of those people that think their child has never done anything wrong, and you're just getting like a defensive wall, what would your tactics be in that case?
That's a great question, and I guess what I might do is try to remove the judgment. Because I think when people are defensive, they feel judged. You're either judging the child or maybe you're judging them as a parent. And that's obviously not the purpose of your call. So what I might say is, oh my gosh, I worry that maybe you're hearing in my raising this with you that I think Susie is a bad girl or something is not going well for her. I'm just reflecting back what I've observed. And I'm worried about it, and I care about both Susie and my child. And I was thinking maybe we could just have a conversation about what the interaction was and how we can help them do better. I think if you can stay very behaviorally focused. So instead of saying Susie's always being mean to Wade, said yesterday Susie ripped something out of Wade's hands and told him he was stupid. And I wasn't sure, so I addressed it. I wanted you to know I addressed it. And if you stay observable, it's harder to say, they can still say, well, I can't imagine that Susie would ever do that. Then you're at an impasse. And you can say, okay, well, I was just offering it. I wouldn't persist if someone is saying to you, N-O, not my angel. But I think by staying behavioral and avoiding labels, you're more likely to get away in. Because you're not saying Susie's a bad kid, you're saying Susie ripped something out of Wade's hand and then told him he was a moron. And that's what we need to focus on. And she may have been having a bad day. And here's what I did. As a parent, I just want you to know, I interceded, said that wasn't very nice, in case you hear about it, And then you're not accusing, and you're not saying bad girl, bad mom, bad dad, but just, hey, I had to get in the middle of something. I wanted you to know why. This is what I saw, and here's what I did. And gosh, if Wade ever does that, I hope you'll let me know. Because then it's more low stakes, and it's not I'm accusing you. I think what I've heard about a lot is sort of labeling kids. This is the bad kid in the class. These are little people in process, right? Like, I am so glad I wasn't judged whether I should be the head of Langley School about how I was in third grade. And so I think avoiding labels and avoiding, and if you say, so-and-so's bullying my child, okay, that goes right up the fire alarm, right? Because that's a serious accusation. But staying behavioral and giving specific examples and asking for partnership maybe will take the defensiveness down. Yes?
So in other discussions of bullying, I've heard it said that there's like three parties. There's obviously the bully, the bullier, and the bystanders.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of the most critical things to solving this is to script the bystanders. And so how do you feel about this script?
I agree with that. I think bystanders are a huge, when I did early sexual harassment work, I was brought to a university, you're going to crack up at this, and the problem was that there was a fraternity, and the men would come out onto the fraternity porch, and when women would walk by, they would rate them. They would say, 10, 1, and they were like, Scully, help us with this. And what I did was I figured out, of the men that were standing on the porch screaming out these numbers, how many were committed to that behavior, and how many were conflicted. And what do you think? Very small number of guys that really wanted to be doing that, and a huge group that was like, oh, I don't know what to do. As soon as I gave them a strategy, which was just get up and go in the house and get another beer, I'm kidding. Strategy for how to cope with it, which was to remove themselves, the behavior stopped because there was no audience. That's a kind of silly, exaggerated, older example. I think we do have to train bystanders. I think we have to give them very specific skills to change the dynamic, but we also can't put it all on bystanders because that's a pretty heavy load to bear. So some of the training, the student-led training pieces, give kids ready-made things to say when someone says something mean. Gives them ways to break up a group dynamic and destabilize the power dynamic. But I think bystanders are incredibly important because I think in a school culture, you do have a lot of kids that are deeply conflicted about what they're seeing, but they have no idea what to do about it. And they're scared that if they do something, they'll lose social status and power. And so I think putting that on the table and talking with kids about that is really valuable. So I agree that bystanders, I just didn't spend a lot of time on it today. I think Englander, when she comes on Friday, is going to talk with us a lot about bystander education and what are the limits and parameters of what bystanders can do. Yes, Amy.
If empathy and appreciation are keys to moral development, right now, the only opportunity that our students have to get out of the school into the greater community is really when you hit 7th grade and they do some and go off and do these things, which I think has had a big impact on those students. Are there other opportunities that we can look at to get the younger students out into getting a little bit of a broader view of the world so they can...
Sure, I think that's a wonderful suggestion. I think, yeah, I mean, I absolutely think that's a brilliant idea. There's some challenges in organizations about what age they'll take people, but I think just using our environment and our city as a classroom, it doesn't have to be that they go serve soup at 3rd grade, but they can be in different places and be exposed to the world, and we can do it through curriculum. And I think we can do a lot of that empathy work right here in this school among ourselves. I really do think a lot of it is explicitly figuring out how you develop that capacity to get outside of oneself and to imagine. And there's a lot of literature that does that. There are movies that do that. There are interactions that they can have that will build on that. But I agree with you that the more the bubble of sort of our cozy little everybody is the same bubble can be explored, the greater their capacity to think more broadly about the world and about people. It will really help. Yes?
That book, How Children Succeed, which I think,
Paul Tuff?
yeah, I think a lot of the teachers read it. It seemed like a trend in the charter schools and some of like these prestigious like northern prep schools is to start grading children on character development. Yeah. It's not that I'm suggesting that, but is there a way, since one of your points is it's such an important component of their development, to get formal feedback? Because as you say, I'm the sample size of 1, you're the sample size of 500.
Yeah. That's such a great point, yeah. And I don't think grading is the way I would probably go, just because I feel like these kids are evaluated in grade form, and that creates another kind of, but giving specific concrete feedback about their empathy and their moral development is hugely important. And I think that's an excellent suggestion. I don't have an easy answer. It's something I would love for the faculty to talk about. How do we start noticing and commenting upon their ability to do that? Because like anything, positive reinforcement is one of the most important motivators in life. And if we can give kids and families some sense of, okay, Susie's doing great on this aspect, but she still is really impulsive and having a hard time controlling her impulsive behavior. Or she has really grown in the last year in her capacity to be a good friend, to be a good listener, to help other people. I think you're onto something really important, and I think in a culture where kids are feeling like their grades and their achievements are going to be the sum total of what's going to make them successful in life, if we can help them attend to that part of their emotional and moral development that is really going to carry them forward into adulthood successfully, I think that's a brilliant point. So I don't have a ready-made answer for you, but I think it's worth exploring. So I'll bring that up with my team. Yes.
Mia?
You! Sorry, you!
I just want to say in response to that, I don't know what teachers your kids have had yet, but I found at Langley, we get a lot of that in our report cards.
Yeah.
I always know
Then parent-teacher
they
conference.
work well with others, they need to work better, they're struggling with their peers. I find the report cards here have been very responsive to my children's character development, because that's what I always tell them, like, okay, who cares about what you're studying? Look at what they said about the way you're behaving.
Yeah.
So I think the school, but at least the teachers my children have done a great job.
I think what ends up happening inevitably as you get older and you move through, we probably lose that thread. I mean, it's as I said, when I went to the preschool classroom and for snack time, I was like, whoa, we have a lot of work to do. And it's very immediate, but I think by the time they're in 7th and 8th grade, we're probably losing that thread a little bit. And that is when it's the most important, in a way, that they continue to get that feedback. When they're feeling the most uncomfortable and out of sorts and not sure about who they are, that's when they really need that shot in the arm to say, keep it up, you're doing great on that front.
Can I just?
Oh, yes, please,
Kathleen. During in middle school, and Brian could probably chime in on this too, that during the parent conference, that the model that we have in middle school is to sort of hop around to tables, and when you meet with your student's advisor, that's a really great place. It's integrated within all the academic areas, but that's really, in many ways, the sole focus of what the advisor is doing in the middle school setting to really explore social and moral development with the students. So I just wanted to interrupt.
Thank you.
And to what Kathleen just said, when you're in middle school and you're going through that, you might have the urge, because you're in a hurry, to skip the PE teachers.
Yeah.
And that's where you really get a lot of feedback on your kids, how they work with others, how they, they meet with all the middle school teachers, right? They all meet together and talk about your kid. And the PE teacher's not left out of
That's
that.
such a great point.
And they really see them interacting with their peers more maybe than other teachers do. So don't skip the PE teachers. They're really in tune with your kids and they know what your kid needs to work on or where they excel, and they're trying to use that in the PE class. Okay, you work with this kid because you're good at that and maybe they're not. So they're in tune with everything that's going on, and you get a lot more information than you think, not just how well they kick the ball.
So I'm sensitive to the time. It's 9:30 on the nose, but I am happy to stick around and continue to field questions. My last pitch is please partner with us. This is really hard stuff. This is not easy. If it were as simple as like a sheet of things that, behaviors that we could stamp out of our culture, I would give you the sheet, we would have the sheet, but it's the nature of human life and human development is that this is thorny, messy stuff. But nothing is more important to us than the emotional development and safety of your children. So please, we are your partners. If we haven't gotten it right in the past, we are sorry. We want to do better moving forward. If you're not sure what to do, just pick up the phone and ask us. We are really here to be your partners. Amy, do you have one last parting thought?
I do. I just have, this is a segue. I'm Amy Jones. I've just been working with the language arts teachers to prepare the next curricular coffee, which is going to be next Tuesday. I just want to put in a plug. And one of the pieces we talked about was the importance of literature in helping kids develop empathy. So it's a great part of our work as language arts teachers is just this very thing. The coffee is on Tuesday. We have a long weekend. So it will be when you're just coming back from the Columbus Day holiday. It's at 8:15. Language arts teachers will be here. We'd love to see everybody back, so I just wanted to put in a plug.
And thank you for making time to come out. I know how busy this time of year is and life is in a school. The fact that the room is full is so heartening to me, and let us know how we can help you. So thank you for coming and have a great day.